December 23rd, 1944. 11:45 hours. From the German observation post on Senamps Hill in Belgium, a pair of field glasses shook against a cold brow as an observer from the 26th Volksgrenadier Division stared into a sky that was not supposed to look like this. Near noon the ceiling lifted, and winter's lid of cloud finally cracked. What the lenses revealed felt impossible. Formations of transport aircraft, not a handful, not a squadron, but hundreds. An airborne procession that seemed to have no end. Mein Gott, the sky, it's full of them. Through the periscope sight, the scene expanded. C-47s sailing in ordered ranks like iron-gray migratory birds, spilling parachutes in bright colors over a small, stubborn town. Until that hour, the weather had conspired with Germany. From December 16th onward, low cloud and freezing fog had grounded Allied aircraft and masked German movements. Bastogne, ringed by German forces, had been starved of relief. Now, as if executed by clock, clear air opened the door. The first aerial resupply to the encircled 101st Airborne Division began about noon. 241 C-47s, a number that dwarfed anything the observers expected to see over one Belgian crossroads. The parachutes blossomed, red for ammunition, blue for medical stores, yellow for food, white for other necessities. The sight drew out a conclusion no artillery barrage could inscribe. The Americans could lift an entire lifeline into the sky and drop it, precisely where it was needed. To men of General Major Heinz Kokot's 26th Volksgrenadier Division, watching from siege lines, the comparison was brutal. The Luftwaffe had not mounted anything on this scale since the catastrophe at Stalingrad 2 years earlier. Here, above a single town, an opponent displayed an ease of air power that made the Wehrmacht's great early war victories feel remote. Numbers, not slogans, were writing the fate of the campaign. The arithmetic of defeat was no longer about heroic stands or clever maneuvers. It was about a logistics engine that could make weather the only real enemy, and even that was temporary. 7 days earlier, the mood had been very different. On December 16, 1944, at 05:30, the German offensive opened with a 90-minute bombardment from approximately 1,600 artillery pieces along a front of roughly 130 kilometers, about 80 miles. This was Unternehmen Wacht am Rhein, Watch on the Rhine, Hitler's last audacious attempt to cut the Allied line in two and seize Antwerp. In the preceding night hours of December 15th, final troop movements had crept forward. Kokot later remembered the look and feel of it. Bitter cold, narrow Eiffel tracks glazed with ice, every path choked with vehicles and files of troops shuffling toward their start positions and gun pits. The message pumped through units was stark. Destiny waited in the Ardennes. The Führer himself had shaped the plan. American forces, they were told, were brittle and decadent, their sectors manned by exhausted formations sent to rest in the forested quiet. Among the launching formations was the 26th Volksgrenadier Division, rebuilt after destruction on the Eastern Front. Under Kokot, it retained a hard core of veterans from Russia and Normandy, now surrounded by replacements drawn from the Luftwaffe and Kriegsmarine. However mixed the composition, the promises were intoxicating. New weapons, adequate supplies, and absolute surprise. At first, reality seemed to comply. American forward positions, convinced a local counterattack was all they faced, buckled under the weight of the blow. Entire groups withdrew in disorder, some surrendering, others flooding west. For a brief stretch of hours, the road to Antwerp looked open on maps and in minds. By December 18th, the operational pulse quickened. General der Panzertruppen Hasso von Manteuffel, commanding 5th Panzer Army, tasked General der Panzertruppen Heinrich Freiherr von Lüttwitz and his XL 7th Panzer Corps with a decisive task. Seize Bastogne, then push on toward the Meuse near Namur. The logic appeared elegant. 7 major roads met in Bastogne. Seize the hub, and the American logistics in the Ardennes would seize with it. Without that crossroads, reinforcements would stall, supplies would thin, and any counterstroke would slow to a crawl. Luttwitz planned to crack a front of about 7 miles, 11 kilometers, with 3 divisions. The 26th Volksgrenadier and 2nd Panzer would open, Panzerlehr in echelon behind them. These were formations with long resumes, some equipped with Germany's best surviving tanks and assault guns. Within the 26th, determination ran high. Its Panzerjäger battalion fielded its full set of 14 tracked Hetzer tank destroyers, and divisional anti-tank strength included an impressive total of 42 75mm guns, making it one of the best armed Volksgrenadier divisions committed in the Ardennes. They were ready for American armor, for roadblocks, for sudden counterpunches, ready, they believed, for anything. Then the pattern changed. As the advance lines angled toward Bastogne, the Americans did not dissolve. They yielded ground methodically, blew bridges as they fell back, raised roadblocks, and charged a toll for every kilometer. Combat Command B of the 10th Armored Division fought delaying actions that bled time from the German schedule. Just enough time for the first elements of the 101st Airborne Division to reach Bastogne, arriving only 4 hours before the leading German units. The Screaming Eagles had been recuperating in Reims when the offensive broke. Trucks collected them within hours. They rolled through a winter night and stepped off the tailgates into defensive sectors, tired, underdressed for the cold, undersupplied for a stand. But presence would prove decisive. By December 20th, the noose had pulled tight. German units completed the ring around Bastogne. By noon on December 21st, all 7 highways into the town lay in German hands, and by night both sides accepted the obvious. Bastogne was surrounded. Inside the pocket stood a composite garrison, elements of the 101st Airborne Division, Combat Command B of the 10th Armored, the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion, and an assortment of attached units, about 22,000 men. They were outnumbered roughly 5 to 1. Cold weather gear was short. Ammunition, rations, and medical supplies ran thin. Senior leadership was also strained. Major General Maxwell Taylor, the 101st's commander, was away. From the German perspective, this resembled Stalingrad inverted. Now Americans were in the cauldron, cut off, short of everything that makes a force last. Luttwitz, a veteran of 1940 who had watched the British at Dunkirk, believed he knew how encirclements ended. Supplies ebbed, morale broke, surrender followed. A merciless winter seemed eager to assist, with temperatures sinking toward 10 degrees. Confidence ran so high that the 2 panzer divisions of ex-Ovser Panzer Corps, having used mobility to cut Bastogne off, did not mass for a single hammer blow against the town. On December 22nd, they pushed on toward the Meuse, leaving only 1 regiment to aid the 26th Volksgrenadier in taking the crossroads. Why burn fuel and armor on a place that hunger and frost would conquer? The weather, from December 16th through the 22nd, had been the best ally available. Heavy overcast grounded Allied reconnaissance and fighter bombers. Columns could move by day. Forces could mass without fear of sudden air attack. In Bastogne, the inverse applied. Every hour under those clouds tightened the belt on the defenders. Some guns had no high explosive left. Others counted their shells by the handful. Rations hit the bottom of the barrel. Men scavenged among wrecks and emptied depots. Aid stations ran out of critical supplies. Wounds survivable under normal care turned fatal. Convinced the end was near, the Germans set the stage for formal surrender. On December 22nd, at about 11:30 hours, 4 German soldiers approached American lines on the Arlon Road from the direction of Remo, south of Bastogne. 2 white flags raised. The senior was Major Wagner of Ixalfeven Panzer Corps. With him, Oberleutnant Helmut Henke from Panzerlehr's operations section, a briefcase under his arm. Blindfolds were ready. The typed ultimatum, in English and German, declared the fortune of war is changing, pointed to armored forces reaching St. Hubert via Houffalize, and demanded an honorable surrender within 2 hours, promising annihilation if refused. The answer came back condensed into one American slang word. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, acting commander, responded, "Nuts." The brevity confused the messengers. Colonel Harper explained it plainly. If they needed translation, it meant, "Go to hell." Back at German headquarters, the tone produced surprise more than rage. In the arithmetic of siege, a trapped force did not answer like that. In later interrogations, Kokot would admit that, given the ratios and the cut lines of supply, refusal looked not courageous, but irrational. The ring was closed. The clouds held. Logistics always wins sieges, and Bastogne's ledger was nearly spent. The next morning revised that math. December 23rd opened clear and hard with frozen light. German sentries rose from frost-bitten foxholes, relieved to feel sunlight, if only as a rumor of warmth. Then a distant drone swelled over the hills. At 06:45, 2 Pathfinder sticks had lifted from Chalgrove in England, inbound to mark drop zones. They jumped at 09:35, were quickly gathered in by the defenders, and began setting their beacons. At 11:50, men all along the line saw the main force arrive. 241 C-47s in ordered files at roughly 1,000 feet, doors open in relay, cargo streaming out as if the sky itself had joined the American order of battle. For the defenders, it was the most heartening sight of the siege. For the besiegers, it was the first clear look at their miscalculation. Chapter 2. Encirclement and the Edge of Endurance. The siege of Bastogne settled into its grim rhythm after December 20th. German units, stretched across the ring of villages encasing the town, dug in under snow and waited for the final American collapse. In the foxholes of the 26th Volksgrenadier Division, men whispered about the captured crossroads that would soon open the road to Antwerp. To them, Bastogne was already a dying thing, a cold corpse waiting for its last breath to escape. Inside the town, however, the pulse still beat. The men of the 101st Airborne Division, the 10th Armored, and the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion fortified what positions they could. They wired crossroads, mined fields, stacked ammunition by the handful. The engineers scavenged fuel and equipment from burned-out vehicles. As the perimeter shrank, each sector took on its own small war. In the east, paratroopers clung to the woods of Marvy. In the south, tank destroyers crouched in frozen orchards, engines idling for warmth. In the west, artillery crews counted their shells with accountant's precision, each round an investment in 1 more hour of survival. The German command believed time itself was the most efficient weapon. Temperatures plunged to -10 degrees Celsius. The men on both sides fought as much against the weather as against each other. Weapons froze solid, rations became blocks of ice, and men lost fingers to frostbite as easily as to gunfire. Every fire drew artillery. Every flare invited counter-battery. Still, the ring held, and the waiting continued. For the Germans, Bastogne was an equation that promised victory. Encircled American strength, roughly 22,000. German besieging force, nearly 5 times that. Ammunition supplies inside the town, perhaps 3 days' worth. Food, scarcely 4. Medical reserves, exhausted. Leadership, partially absent. To General von Lüttwitz, commanding X-12th Panzer Corps, the situation was textbook. He had seen what happened at Dunkirk, what encirclement did to morale. He envisioned white flags, not more firefights. Confidence ran so high that Lüttwitz allowed his panzers to roll westward towards the Meuse rather than batter Bastogne directly. The mission to seize Antwerp mattered more than one pocket of resistance. Bastogne, he believed, would crumble on its own, frozen, starved, or both. Only Kokot's 26th Volksgrenadier Division remained behind to complete the task. joined by a single regiment from the 15th Panzer Grenadier Division. In those same days, the town endured its own version of Stalingrad, but in reverse. Instead of Soviet factories and bread lines, there were paratroopers living on hard biscuits, medics cutting bandages from parachute silk, and chaplains praying over the frozen bodies of men who had never expected to die in Belgium. Field hospitals operated in cellars by candlelight. The wounded lay on stretchers made of doors. Morphine ran out, plasma was gone. Some men were saved by luck, a single shot of penicillin smuggled from one battalion to another. Others simply faded into the cold. By December 22nd, when the German delegation arrived under white flags to deliver the surrender ultimatum, the Americans were already at the outer limit of endurance. The envoys were polite, even ceremonious. They spoke in the tone of victors offering dignity to a defeated opponent. 2 hours to decide. Total annihilation promised if they refused. The answer, carried back through the snow by the bewildered German messengers, was as brief as it was defiant. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe's single word, nuts, crossed the line like a bullet. To the Germans, the term made no sense. It had to be translated into plain language. Go to hell. For the defenders, it was a declaration. They might freeze, they might starve, but they would not surrender. That refusal puzzled Kokot deeply. In later interrogations, he would recall thinking it was less brave than insane. The Americans had no visible way to survive. They had no weather advantage, no open roads, no reinforcements. They had nothing except stubbornness. Then came the morning of December 23rd. The sky that dawned above the Ardennes was unlike any they had seen in a week. Hard blue, unbroken. German soldiers stepped from their foxholes into the light with relief. For once, they could feel the sun on their faces. The sound that came next changed everything. It began as a faint vibration in the still air, a low murmur that grew steadily until the hills themselves seemed to hum. Then came the unmistakable shape, aircraft, in numbers too large to count. At 06:45, 2 Pathfinder teams had already jumped to mark the drop zones. By 11:50, the horizon was filled. 241 C-47s moved in formation, scarcely 1,000 feet above the ground, doors yawning open, parachutes tumbling out like blossoms in a storm. The sky became a mosaic of color. Red for ammunition, blue for medical supplies, yellow for food, white for clothing, green for communications gear. The men in Bastogne stared upward in wonder, the Germans in disbelief. For the first time since the offensive began, it was the defenders who looked like a living army, supplied, supported, connected to something vast and unstoppable. The German guns answered almost immediately. Anti-aircraft batteries of the 26th Volksgrenadier Division swung skyward, firing in frantic rhythm. 88s boomed, 20mm cannons chattered, machine guns stuttered. Black puffs filled the air around the slow-moving transports. A few planes took hits, some trailing smoke, a few breaking apart. Yet the formations held. 14 C-47s were lost that day, a tiny fraction of the armada. Some burned, some crashed in fields, some disappeared into the forest. But the rest flew on, unwavering, releasing their cargo until the sky itself seemed to rain salvation. One aircraft, tail engulfed in flame, continued dropping bundles until the last second before plummeting into the trees, an act of duty so methodical it bordered on devotion. To the Americans on the ground, each parachute that drifted down meant life. To the Germans watching through binoculars, it meant something colder and more final, proof that the war had changed in ways they could no longer control. Chapter 3. The Arithmetic of Abundance. The morning of December 23rd, 1944, over Bastogne became a pageant of industrial might that no German soldier could mistake for coincidence. From the snowbound fields and frozen ridges, the besiegers watched the colored parachutes descending in slow, deliberate rhythm, as if the Americans were painting victory into the winter air. What had begun as a tactical relief effort unfolded as a spectacle of logistics so vast that it crushed morale as effectively as any artillery barrage. The mathematics of it all were impossible to ignore. Each hue in the canopy cloud represented a category of supply: red for munitions, blue for medical goods, yellow for food, white for general materials, green for communication gear, orange for fuel. German intelligence officers with field glasses attempted to count, to estimate tonnage and purpose. What they saw defied comprehension. Red parachutes bore artillery shells and mortar rounds, cases of them. Blue carried plasma, morphine, and surgical kits. Yellow delivered crates of K rations, D rations, canned meats, and chocolate. White brought boots, gloves, parkas, blankets. Green and orange, the rarest colors, dropped batteries, radios, and cans of gasoline. By sunset, a single American battalion reported having received over 500,000 K rations and hundreds of gallons of fuel. The ammunition tallies for the day told their own story. Over 600 rounds of high explosive, hundreds of white phosphorus, more than 200 anti-tank. This was not desperation. It was procedure. A military bureaucracy had reached across the English Channel, through a frozen continent, and delivered its promise by air, with precision, at scale, on time. The defenders cheered, waved flags. Some even saluted the planes as they passed. To the men watching from the German lines, that joy looked unthinkable. The confidence of an army that refused to believe in siege warfare. And the sky did not empty after that first wave. Throughout the day, fresh flights appeared, crossing the horizon like scheduled trains. At 2 in the afternoon, another formation arrived, this time towing gliders. 92 tons of supplies touched down that day by glider alone. These wooden craft, towed behind C-47s, carried what parachutes could not: jeeps, artillery pieces, medical units, and even doctors and nurses. One glider brought nothing but blood, whole blood, chilled and sealed for transfusions. The Germans could scarcely comprehend such extravagance. Their field hospitals, even for officers, lacked anesthesia and disinfectant. Bandages were reused until they fell apart. Morphine was a dream. Yet across the lines, the Americans were flying in penicillin and surgical lights. The contrast was obscene. The morale effect was instant and corrosive. German medics, peering through binoculars, recorded their disbelief in later interrogations. They had been treating wounds with sawdust and newspaper. Now they watched an enemy restore its wounded with the luxury of modern science. One medical officer wrote later, "We realized we were no longer fighting another army. We were fighting a machine." By late afternoon, the drop zones glowed with colored silk, and the sound of engines continued in waves. Pathfinder teams, working under sniper fire, marked new landing points. The coordination was so exact that within minutes of each delivery, the newly arrived shells were being fired back at the German lines. Artillery crews literally turned falling parachutes into immediate barrages, ammunition dropping from the sky, feeding guns before the silk even touched the snow. And then came the next act, the fighter bombers. At first, the Germans assumed the low-flying aircraft were more transports. Then the unmistakable whine of turbo-supercharged engines split the air. P-47 Thunderbolts roared overhead, the armored fists of Allied air power. They came in low, silver streaks against the pale sky and opened fire. 8 heavy machine guns on each wing spat tracers into the roads below. Rockets streaked out, hammering convoys, hitting trucks, half-tracks, even horses pulling guns. What had been a safe front under cloud became a killing ground under sun. The same clear weather that freed the transports also unleashed the long-dormant wrath of Allied air superiority. German supply columns, which had moved freely for a week, now burned where they stood. A single road junction could become a graveyard of vehicles within minutes. Pilots hunted small groups of soldiers, strafing anything that moved. Those on the ground described the sound as like thunder following you. The offensive momentum, so carefully built, froze instantly. Units that had rolled confidently towards the Meuse now huddled in forests, waiting for night. Movement by daylight became suicidal. By dusk, the Germans along the Bastogne perimeter understood what had changed. In one day, the Americans had overturned the siege and inverted the psychology of the campaign. The Wehrmacht had trapped the 101st Airborne, but the trap itself had become a demonstration arena. What they witnessed was not the relief of a single division, but the unveiling of a civilization's war engine. Industrial capacity turned into oxygen. General Major Heinz Kokott, pacing his command post that night, saw the figures for the day's losses and shook his head. His artillery had fired thousands of shells, his infantry had advanced nowhere, and yet the Americans were stronger by dusk than at dawn. They now had food, ammunition, fuel, and morale. The Germans had none of those things in surplus. Across the fields, German soldiers whispered of the spectacle. Some tried to rationalize it. Perhaps this was the last of America's strength, the last gamble. Others knew better. If the enemy could fill a single sky over one town with hundreds of aircraft, how many skies could they fill elsewhere? By nightfall, the conclusion was inescapable. The 26th Volksgrenadier Division had seen the future, and it belonged to whoever could command the air. Chapter 4. The Breaking Point, Christmas Eve, 1944. The sky over the Ardennes darkened again, folding its grey curtain across the battlefield. Snow returned, thick and wind-driven, muting the thunder that had filled the air the previous day. To German soldiers crouched in the ruins and forests surrounding Bastogne, the weather's return felt almost merciful. The heavens had finally stopped favoring their enemy. For one night, perhaps, the air would go quiet. Inside Bastogne, the lull was deceptive. The town lay under snow and smoke, its streets rutted with frozen mud and strewn with shattered masonry. Men slept in basements or in shell holes, wrapped in blankets stiff with frost. Many had gone days without sleep or warmth. Yet morale was strangely high. The men of the 101st Airborne and the 10th Armored Division ate their meager rations under the soft glow of candles and laughed bitterly about Christmas dinner in Belgium. They knew the siege was far from over, but the clear skies of December 23rd had given them faith, not only in the Air Force above, but in the invisible network behind it, the colossal engine of their nation's industry. For the Germans, that same day had left an invisible wound. No report could soften the psychological blow. Kokott's officers had watched the American resupply with their own eyes. They had fired every available anti-aircraft gun, but the effect was negligible. What returned to their command posts that night was an unwelcome truth. They could no longer match the scale of their opponent's resources. A battle they had planned to end through encirclement had become a mirror, reflecting their own weakness. Nevertheless, orders came down for one more attempt. On Christmas Eve, with snow now grounding the Allied plains again, the 26th Volksgrenadier Division received reinforcements, a Panzergrenadier regiment from the 15th Panzergrenadier Division. The following morning would bring the last concerted effort to crush Bastogne before the skies cleared once more. At 3:00 a.m. on Christmas morning, the German assault began. In the dark, muffled by snow, 18 Panzer IVs and supporting infantry advanced toward the northwest perimeter near Hemrula. The men of the 327th Glider Infantry Regiment manned the thin line there, dug into shallow trenches under the eaves of a pine forest. When the tanks broke through, their engines rumbling like giants in the fog, the defenders braced for the worst. For a moment, the German breakthrough seemed inevitable. Then the American artillery spoke. Guns that had been nearly silent days earlier now roared with renewed fury, firing ammunition delivered by air only 48 hours before. High explosive shells tore into the snow where German infantry moved. Anti-tank crews, crouched in white camouflage, opened fire with 57mm guns and bazookas. 2 tanks managed to escape the first barrage, only to be destroyed by the rapid response of armored elements from division headquarters. By mid-morning, all 18 German tanks lay wrecked or burning. The assault had failed. For Kokot's men, it was the final confirmation of what they already feared. The Americans were not starving, not freezing into surrender. They were fighting with fresh ammunition and, impossibly, renewed confidence. The resupply from the sky had turned the impossible defense into an impregnable fortress. Meanwhile, the weather continued its cruel oscillation. On December 24th and 25th, snow and fog prevented major Allied air operations. For a moment, the German command dared to hope that fortune might turn again. But those hopes dissolved the following day. December 26th brought a thin, pale sun and a distant thunder from the south. Not from the sky this time, but from tanks. By afternoon, reconnaissance reports confirmed it. Elements of General George S. Patton's Third Army were pushing toward Bastogne. The long-awaited relief force had arrived. In the gathering darkness at about 1700 hours, the lead tanks of the 37th Tank Battalion, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, reached the outer edge of the Bastogne perimeter. They were followed by the rest of Combat Command R of the 4th Armored Division. The corridor had been opened. Bastogne was no longer surrounded. Inside the town, soldiers of the 101st Airborne cheered as the 1st Shermans rolled in, their hulls scarred from the fight south of the town. For days, they had fought on the edge of extinction. Now, relief had come not by surrender, but by sheer endurance. Outside the town, in the snow-covered fields once crowded with German assault guns, the reality was devastating. The encirclement that was meant to break American morale had instead broken German confidence. Kokot's division was exhausted. Luttwitz's corps, deprived of fuel and mobility, began to unravel. And far to the north, Mantefel's 5th Panzer Army saw its timetable collapse. The road to Antwerp, the very purpose of the Ardennes offensive, was closed forever. The statistical record tells the rest with brutal clarity. Between December 23rd and 27th, more than 2,100 tons of supplies were delivered by air into Bastogne. 15,000 artillery shells, 8,000 gallons of fuel, food for 15,000 men, winter clothing, medical stores, and radio equipment, all delivered to troops who were supposedly isolated beyond rescue. By contrast, the German forces surrounding Bastogne, numbering roughly 54,000, received no air support at all. Their Luftwaffe was a ghost of its former self. Fewer than 100 German aircraft flew over the Bastogne sector during the entire siege, while Allied sorties numbered in the thousands. As the last shots faded on Christmas night, the meaning of those numbers began to sink in. The 26th Volksgrenadier Division had been brave, resourceful, disciplined. But bravery could not outfly a sky filled with C-47s, nor could discipline resupply itself across ruined roads. The calculus of modern war had changed, and no amount of courage could rewrite the equation. By December 27th, the German dream of splitting the Allied armies had vanished beneath the snowdrifts of Bastogne. What remained was exhaustion, disbelief, and a dawning recognition that Germany's might, once mechanical and unstoppable, had been eclipsed by something larger, colder, and more methodical. Chapter 5. The sky that ended the war. When the snow cleared over the Ardennes in the final days of December 1944, the war revealed its new geometry. Tanks and trenches, courage and cunning, all the ancient weights of battle seemed to shrink beneath the expanding dominion of the sky. Above Bastogne, the future of warfare had taken shape not in strategy or heroism, but in tonnage and flight paths. The Germans, once masters of blitzkrieg, had built their legend on the precision of movement. But now, as they trudged through the wreckage of the offensive they had once called Wacht am Rhein, they faced a power that fought by other laws. The Americans had transformed the air itself into supply lines, and with that transformation came the quiet death of the old world's military arithmetic. In the last days of December and the 1st of January, Hitler's dream of a revived offensive withered completely. Orders from the Führer's headquarters demanded that Bastogne be taken at any cost. Reinforcements arrived in waves: the elite 1st SS Panzer Division from the 6th Panzer Army, the 9th SS Panzer, the Führer Escort Brigade, and the 117th Volksgrenadier Division. Each was thrown into the meat grinder south of the town, their attacks colliding against an American defense that only grew stronger. The last major German assault came on January 4th. It began with artillery that rumbled like a weary echo of the grand barrage of December 16th. Infantry surged forward once more, slipping and stumbling over snow, packed with the wrecks of their own armor. Within hours, it was clear the momentum was gone. The offensive stalled and then shattered. The myth of German invincibility, already cracked in the east, disintegrated in the frozen forests of Belgium. Among those who survived to write about it later was General Hasso von Manteuffel, commander of the 5th Panzer Army. In his post-war assessments, he returned again and again to Bastogne, calling it the lesson the modern soldier must never forget. The Americans, he observed, had solved the fundamental problem of mechanized warfare: supply. They could sustain encircled forces by air more effectively than Germany could sustain its spearheads by road. When the weather favored them, he wrote, their material power rendered tactical brilliance irrelevant. General Major Heinz Kokott, whose 26th Volksgrenadier Division had fought with grim determination around the southern perimeter, echoed the sentiment in quieter words during his post-war interrogations. On December 23rd, he said, when the sky filled with transport planes, every man who saw them understood. We were not fighting an army anymore. We were fighting an industrial civilization. He remembered his meeting after the war with Colonel Harry Kinnard, the youthful G3 operations officer of the 101st Airborne. Is it possible, Kokott asked his interpreter in disbelief, that this boy was our principal opponent? The encounter made visible what Bastogne had already proven. The new age of war belonged to nations that could raise such officers by the thousands, feed them by the air, and replace their losses without pause. The psychological ripples of the Bastogne air supply spread through German lines faster than any communique. Soldiers who had once spoken confidently about reaching Antwerp now talked only about survival. Captured prisoners told Allied interrogators of a single shared vision: the sky above Bastogne filled with aircraft, a miracle of abundance they could not reconcile with the shortages that plagued their own army. It was, in the cruelest sense, Germany's own doing. By encircling Bastogne, they had forced the Americans to demonstrate what industrial modernity could achieve under pressure. Had they bypassed the town as some officers recommended, they might never have witnessed the aerial display that broke their spirit more effectively than any defeat on the map. The siege became not only a tactical failure, but a revelation. The Third Reich's industrial dream had been eclipsed by a far greater one. After the relief of Bastogne, German operations in the Ardennes dwindled into disorganized fighting withdrawals. The offensive that had begun with 1,000 guns on December 16th ended with exhausted companies trying to hold frozen ground in early January. Hitler refused to accept the outcome, demanding renewed attacks, but his armies were bleeding into the snow. The C-47s that had filled the skies on December 23rd were only a fraction of what America could summon. Over 10,000 of those aircraft were built during the war, their engines linking continents and campaigns from Normandy to Market Garden, from the Pacific Islands to the heart of Europe. Each one was a moving testament to the industrial rhythm that Germany could no longer imitate or interrupt. history would confirm the truth that the German observers on Senamp's Hill had learned in that one terrible hour. Power had shifted from the ground to the air, from the daring of individuals to the coordination of systems. The 101st Airborne Division held Bastogne not merely through bravery, but through the invisible hand of factories, convoys, engineers, and planners half a world away. From December 19, 1944 to January 6, 1945, the 101st suffered 341 killed, 1,691 wounded, and 516 missing, remarkably light losses for a force outnumbered 5 to 1. The resupply effort, 1,113 tons in total, made those numbers possible. Every crate dropped, every parachute deployed, was a vote of confidence in a new kind of warfare where distance no longer guaranteed safety or isolation. When the German soldiers of the 26th Volksgrenadier Division looked up through the cold air on December 23rd, they saw more than aircraft. They saw the handwriting on the wall, the end of their cause written not in words, but in altitude, coordination, and abundance. The war would continue for 5 more months, but for those who witnessed that day, its outcome was already certain. The sky over Bastogne had become a mirror reflecting the new world order, the era of industrial supremacy, the age of logistics as destiny. The Americans would never allow the 101st to fall because they no longer fought by the limits of geography. The siege was over, and so, in a sense, was the war. On that clear December morning, when hundreds of silver aircraft crossed the Belgian sky and filled it with the colors of survival, the last illusions of the Third Reich dissolved. The men who watched from the hills understood the unspoken message written in vapor trails and silk. The age of conquest was over. The age of capability had begun.